Well, hello everybody and welcome. Sorry I missed last month's meeting. So it's 2 months since I've done one of these, so I can't really quite remember what we do and how we do it, but that's all right. We have three very different but very interesting speakers today. We've had five speakers actually, because two of them are duos. We'll get onto them in a moment. Our next meeting will be 12th of March. We have two speakers, John Baxter and Alan Rausch. I've still got one slot available on the 12th of March if anybody wants to email me with a good idea. One other thing I'd like to mention is that for the Traditional Song Forum members, which most of you probably are, we had an appeal last month, basically, for the Friends of the TSF, who are people who send us donations to keep us going, help pay for the website and bursaries for people to go to conferences, that sort of thing. We've had an excellent response. In fact, we've raised over £800, which is wonderful, but we could do this with a little bit more if anybody else wants to contribute. We do try to keep everything free. We keep these Zoom meetings free. Membership of the TSF is free. And whenever possible, conferences and meetings are free. So we do appreciate donations from the Friends of the TSF. You don't get a badge to wear, but you do. You can feel sort of nice about it. Nice people.
I can do something about that. Oh, I can arrange a badge.
We could arrange a badge, couldn't we? We could have
print out,
badge ceremony,
and provide your own safety pin. It would be easy.
That's right. Yes, print out your own badge, couldn't you? Stick on one. Anyway, and as you'll know from the newsletter, we're planning a conference in Gloucester in May the 13th. That's going to be an in-person conference, our first one for several years, of course, in person and online. And we've got a call for papers for that conference out at the moment. So don't be shy if you've got something you want to come and give to us. And please do think about coming in person if you can to Gloucester, because that's what conferences really are all about. Zoom's all very well, but it's the in-person stuff that really cuts it for me. Anyway, we're going to go to Linn Phipps and Doug Huggins for our first session this afternoon. We're going to have the Fair Flower of Northumberland. So Linn and Doug, don't forget to unmute yourselves. Over to you.
Thank you, Steve. And hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share our interest in this song with you. We'd like to introduce ourselves from both sides of the Atlantic. I'm Linn. I'm a traditional singer in Gaelic and English with special passions for Gaelic song and World War I. Since the start of lockdown, I created a website, issued 5 CDs, hosted 55 workshops to learn a Gaelic song, and over 30 online Gaelic Kadies, and participated in Zoom sings and festivals and collaborations all over the world. And I acquired a song partner. Doug.
And I'm Doug, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here. I lived in California during the early 1960s, and amid the 3 biblical plagues, earthquakes, smog, and commercial popular folk music. At various times I performed in bluegrass, country, and folk settings, both instrumental and vocal. Traditional Irish, Scottish, and English folk are always close to my heart. And fast forwarding to 2019, as opportunities to travel and perform disappeared, I began focusing on a cappella singing in Zoom sessions, including sea shanties, Irish, Scottish traditional song, and English folk music.
So while we live 5,000 miles apart and 7 time zones apart, we've been singing together live on Zoom for over 2 years. We had never actually planned that or expected it to happen, but we chatted regularly over Zoom and shared song versions. We're clearly interested in similar songs. Of course, on Zoom, only one person can speak or indeed sing at any one time. And that also means that Zoom lends itself to sequential singing, frustrating for a choir, but great for a duo. And if it was my suggestion, the choice of our very first song was Doug's, a poem written by Violet Jacobs about a who lost her son in the First World War one of my own lifelong obsessions. And the song is a dialogue between the wind and a traveller travelling back to Scotland through England. We found we really loved the idea of sequential shared singing, and we settled into a pattern of regularly working together on songs, choosing versions, what we called division of parts, deciding how to share the lines, practicing and performing. We made these conversation songs a specialty and rapidly discovered that very many songs, especially old songs and ballads, are in fact dialogues, but they're usually sung by only one singer. We even made a CD of our favourite early songs, all by remote recordings we hadn't actually met. And participating in regular Zoom sings and producing old ballad and songbooks, we were always looking out for songs that would suit our style of singing, that would be interesting and challenging. We developed a taste for songs with a comeuppance or a twist, and although that applies to very many ballads, I heard the wonderful Fair Flower of Northumberland ballad. I'm just going to screen share a picture now. There we go. Oh, nope, that hasn't worked. I'm so sorry. I'll try that again. Okay. And I'm unable to recall who actually sung this first, but we started to learn more about this ballad, which Doug will tell you now.
Lynn, we're not seeing your screen share.
It's not working. I'm going to try and close the files again while Doug starts. Thank you.
Fine. Okay.
Well, let's take a brief look at how this ballad managed to survive through the centuries to be here today. As we started reviewing 19th and 20th century collections for versions, we noted that the ballad book, MacEdward Leach, which Linn had bought secondhand or probably umpteenth hand, pointed us back to a relatively famous early novel by Thomas Deloney, the short title of which is Jack of Newbury, for easier handling. It actually goes on quite a bit. This is the collected works. Within this, there is a frontispiece for the facsimile. There it is. As you can see, it's quite a long title, but Jack of Newbury will do. This book's believed to have been written in about 1597, although some sources mention it being licensed to T. Millington in 1596, and this is assumed to be Thomas Millington, a London publisher of early works of Shakespeare, who was occasionally fined by his guild for publishing ballads and other works for which he did not have the rights. Because of its popularity, the novel, and the fact that it's been studied as an early antecedent of what became the modern novel, it apparently survived into the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries in many libraries and collections and reprintings, which this is, as you see on the screen. The book was the Elizabethan equivalent of a bestseller with multiple printings. This frontispiece says it's the 9th or 10th printing, dated 1626, and the initials TD. He was the one who expanded the edition. In Deloney's book, the song we know as the Fair Flower, or the Heiress of Northumberland, or the Provost's Doctor, and many other names, the Betrayed Lady, is titled The Maiden's Song, reflecting its place in Deloney's storyline, where it's sung by 200 maidens working in Jack Winchcombe's weaving factory in honor of an imagined visit by Henry VIII and his retinue. You can see on this first page, there's a story setting at the top, His Majesty came in, and so on and so forth. And then all the verses of the song follow. And at the end, King Henry throws them a great reward, which I assume is a handful of coins that they have to scramble for. The song itself may be much older than Deloney's novel, since he collected, revised, and published a number of then popular songs and poems, not unlike what Robert Burns did a couple hundred years later. Variants of the basic story are found on both sides of the Northumberland-Scottish border, and elements of the story are also found in a few other countries, which we'll get into later. But first, over to Linn to look at the versions found in the British Isles.
Just move that up just like that. Okay, so I'm going to say a bit about the versions we looked at, all of them similar in theme, with the naive girl or lady deceived by sweet talk and promises, and finally coming to realise the scale of her deception and betrayal. We looked at Frances Child, this one, I'm sure we've all got it, pages 23 to 26, which I'm just showing here, and noting that Child does not give a tune, and the words we use are very similar to Child version 1, which is on page 23. Sourced, in fact, nearly all of our words from MacEdward Leach, this one here, page 71, which I think you can see here. I'm going to make it a wee bit bigger so you can see it. Because this to us had the best song storyline, although we altered occasional lines. For example, we replaced line 2 of verse 1 and throughout. This version has a full 35 verses. MacEdward Leach describes this ballad, it's in the middle here, but I'll quote it because the print's a wee bit small. An English-Scottish ballad with no American versions. The oldest text is Delaunay's Pleasant History of John Winchcombe, 1633, here reprinted. We'll just ignore his typo, which accidentally transcribed pleasant as peasant, but I quite like that. We viewed his online original work here through the online book that Doug has already shown you. So I'll just skip through those quickly. There we go. Okay. We were initially puzzled by the switch from and the previous one I was just looking at, from 4 lines in verse 1 to 3 lines through all the other verses thereafter. However, Doug offers a thesis on why it moved, the printed version moved from 4 lines to 3 lines. Doug, would you like to?
Yeah, my guess is that there was no actual need to print the repetitions of the second line refrain because someone familiar with ballads would likely know to sing that refrain anyway. But it also, in long ballads, putting in the repetition of the same line over and over would eat up the supply of movable type, as well as increasing the typesetting labor and the proofing labor, and possibly even add a page or two to the book. So my theory is only 3 lines got printed to save the time and expense of printing in paper.
And someone familiar with the ballads would let you know to sing them anyway.
Right.
So it's a good theory. To be sure which version we wanted to sing, we looked at a number of further versions. And of course, we needed to find and decide on a tune. So we also looked at William Christie's traditional ballad airs, 1881. And this was based on an 8-line version, 8-line verses, as you can see on the screen. I'm going to make it a wee bit bigger. There we go. And this one did actually contain a tune, but it wasn't the one we decided to use. We were much drawn to the version printed in Last Leaves of Traditional Airs and Ballads, 1925. It's this one here. It's actually quite big. This was compiled by Gavin Grieg and edited by Alexander Keith. And this one here. So Grieg says on page 8, which I've put up on the screen now, that the ballad was first published in England in the early 17th century, which is what we've obviously discovered, and that Scottish versions were also published by Buchan and Kinloch, and are also found in Sharp's and Motherwell's collections. Grieg described his printed version as closest to Kinloch's, but omitting some of his stanzas. Excuse me. What we liked about this 4-line version was the refrains. The refrains do actually vary a wee bit according to the verse, but are essentially line 2, "Oh, but her or my love was easily won," and line 4, "and she or I or other variants, the fair flower of Northumberland," Northumberland always making an appearance. We also noticed, and I'm just going to scroll down to pull that one up. We also noticed that the last few verses, that the last few verses of this version does round out the story of what happens when the errant daughter, the fair flower, does return to her parents. And we wondered about whether we could add something to our version here. So we adopted the Grieg refrains into our version, but we did still need a tune. So basically, just scrolling to the second page of Grieg here, we noticed that Grieg noted that his version did not come with a tune, but he did include a tune from a Mrs. Lyle of Line of Skene, which is in Aberdeenshire. We loved this tune, and I'm just exhibiting it now. And while as written, it comprises the first two lines are refrain and the second two lines are verse. We repurposed the tune to fit with a pattern of line 1 of verse story and line 2 of refrain, line 3 of verse story and line 4 of refrain. Now we were ready to start learning it properly. Well, not quite. We had noticed that MacEdward Leach, the MacEdward Leach Deloney version, lacked an ending about what does happen when the fair flower returns home, whereas the Greek version did include this. However, the language used, being more in Scots, did not really fit with that of the MacEdward Leach Deloney version that we are using. So we took the two final verses of the William Christie version and added them here into our version, and then slightly modified the language of the last verse of the Greek version regarding the fair flower not wanting for the Selva to get a future husband after she had returned home. And over to Doug for some insights into other versions of this song.
Often when we're looking for song information, we'd review secondary and open source sites like Mudcat and mainly Norfolk. Although on this occasion we had a number of ballad books to hand and went straight to them and forgot to have a look at the online resources. But in preparing for the presentation, we stumbled on a site called bluegrassmessenger.com. And this gives us some interesting links to similar songs in other countries. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but Bluegrass Messenger lists similar tales in Scandinavian, Polish, and German ballads, which may hint at possibly a common ancestor, or at least certainly a lot of communication between singers in the different countries before Deloney immortalized it. Common elements include a knight on horseback persuading a maid to rob her father's household and ride away with him and become his lady, him proving false and abandoning her in disgrace or in some cases even death. And these also appear in Lady Isabel and the Elf Knight or the Outlandish Knight, Route 21, Child 4. Child Waters, Fair Ellen, Fair Margaret, Route 43, Child 63. And Young Andrew, Route 6740, Child 48.
So now we are at close to the end of our brief presentation to you, but we are going to sing you a wee bit of the version that we've been talking about that we put together because we thought you might like to hear a wee bit of it. We're not singing you the whole 40 verses, you'll be glad to hear, but we're going to pick up the story about halfway through. Doug.
Starting with the difficult crossing of the water to get into Scotland. A gallant steed he did bestride, oh, but her love was easily won, and with the lady away did ride, and she the fair flower of Northumberland.
They rode till they came to a water clear, oh, but her love was easily won. Good sir, how shouldst I follow you here, and I the fair flower of Northumberland? The water is rough and wonderful deep, oh, but my love was easily won, and I in my saddle I shall not keep, and I the fair flower of Northumberland.
Fear not the ford, fair lady, quoth he, oh, but your love was easily won, for long I cannot stay for thee, and thou the fair flower of Northumberland.
The lady pricked her wanton steed, oh, but her love was easily won, and o'er the river swam with speed, and she the fair flower of Northumberland. From top to toe all wet was she, oh, but her love was easily won. This have I done for love of thee, and I the fair flower of Northumberland. Thus rode she all one winter's night, oh, but her love was easily won, till Eden is left the chiefest town in all Scotland.
And then skipping on to the very ending, what happens after she gets home? Out spoke her father, and he spoke bold. Oh, but your love was easily won. How could you do so, 15 years old, and you, the fair flower of Northumberland?
Out spoke her mother, she spoke with a smile. Oh, but your love was easily won. You're not the first made by a Scotsman beguiled, and you're welcome back home to Northumberland. Ye shall not want for bread nor wine. Oh, but your love was easily won, nor for the gold to get you a man, and you're still the fair flower of Northumberland. All you fair maids, be warned by me. Oh, but my love was easily won. Scots were ne'er true, nor never will be, to lord nor lady, nor fair England. So, thank you. Just going to scroll to our last sheet now. So a big thank you for the opportunity to share this amazing ballad with you and the insights and discoveries we gained along the way with our style of developing sequential Zoom singing. This is a wee bit about where you can find the full version, 40 odd verses on YouTube, which we've recently loaded, and a bit about our own our webpage, our YouTube channel, our debut CB, and where you can find us. And big thank you for listening to our presentation and for inviting us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Excellent start to today's sessions. As always, you can ask questions or make comments by going down to reactions and clicking on raise your hand. Don't just raise your hand on the screen because I can't see all of you. I'm a bit disappointed, Linn and Doug, that you didn't have 200 maidens singing song today.
Next time we'll make a note, Steve. I'm sorry to have let you down on that one.
Yeah, please do. I'm sure the TSF can organise 200 maidens quite easily.
You have no idea how hard it is to find 200 maidens.
I don't know. I've never tried. Anyway, Margaret has first hand up. Margaret Bennett.
Thanks very much. One of my own favourite ballads. You mentioned MacEdward Leach collection. Which collection were you referring to of MacEdward Leach's? I know it's not in his Songs of the Lower Labrador Coast. Had a wee quick look. I can't see. I'm sorry, I can't read. Which one?
It's the ballad book.
The ballad book.
I think it was 1955. Yeah.
And where did he get his version? Because MacEdward Leach was in Pennsylvania. So where did he get his version?
So according to what he wrote in that, excuse me, in the book, he based it on the Deloney version.
Yeah, the book is one of these collections of ballads from all over the place, isn't it? It's not from Leach's collection.
He reprinted the verses from Thomas Deloney, which is why we called it the MacEdward Leach Deloney version when we were talking about that one. And he
didn't he specifically say that there were no American versions collected?
Yeah. There were no American versions collected, yeah. Which is, I think, an interesting point, which perhaps we never actually pursued, why I had never gone to America, or apparently never gone to America.
Thank you, Margaret. Abby Sale.
Yeah, I actually heard that and first heard that in Mac Leach's class. He liked that, but the ending intrigues me because the way you have it is, I guess, I heard it from Dick Gaughan. It's essentially the same as Gavin Gregg, except for the very last verse. But I've always been troubled. I have had the impression that the mother is warning her from her own past experience. There's nothing literature about that, but I wonder if you have that impression from her as well.
I think
You're not the first at those, that line.
yeah, I think that one of the things that we noticed in the version is that the age of the girl does vary. So the one that we're singing has her at 15 years old.
Yeah.
Other versions have her at 18 years old, but it's still a really young age, to be going off with a stranger. So I think what she's warning her is that she's not the first one to be beguiled, but is welcome home, and everything will be okay. So I think that the mother is very much reassuring the girl. There are differences in the versions about the attitude of the father. That's probably a bigger variation, and the words we sing in this version are about how could you do this at just 15. So the mother is partly reassuring and welcoming home the girl and saying she'll have plenty of money to find a future husband, but she's also perhaps counteracting the very critical response she gets from the father. I don't know if you want to comment as well, Doug.
No, just that there were a couple of versions that had even more graphic negative endings, like her bastard brother spoke up and said you shouldn't get any inheritance.
Oh, okay.
Apparently the father had remarried somewhere in there, and it wasn't her mother, it was her stepmother. But that was just one that we came across.
Michael Bell's got his hand up. Michael?
I just quickly wondered if you could talk a little bit about what were the criteria that you made by which you made your selections to add or subtract from the text you plan to sing. In other words, were you narrative driven, aesthetic driven? What were the particular conditions for your choices?
That's a good question, Michael. I think we mentioned along the way there that we really wanted to have a clear storyline, and we were attracted to this version because it had a very strong storyline, and that's the criteria for a ballad altogether, isn't it, that it should tell a story. So we looked for the storyline, and as I think we mentioned, when you start to look at different versions, very often, I'm sure we can't be the only people doing the same. You feel, well, there's a nice bit of story here, there's a nice bit of story there. Largely what we felt is that we wanted to stick with the one version. We mainly stuck with the Deloney version, but we felt that the ending was weak, and didn't include the story about what happens when the girl gets home to her parents. So that's where we added a bit more narrative, which came from Christian Grieg.
And
Well,
for me, I just like happy endings.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that idea of restoration is probably the oldest story in ballad theory, all the way back to Percy, and the notions of beauty. That's why I wondered whether you were looking to restore a beautiful text or restore a coherent story.
Really the latter. We wanted to fill out the story, but we did discuss all of the versions, and we always discuss this concept of what is a happy ending too. Doug does have a preference over myself for happy endings, but Doug tends to describe happy endings as ones which are just endings, which is not quite the same thing as an entirely kind of sunny and happy end. One thing we didn't mention, and which again I think is an interesting point, we forgot to mention this in our presentation, is that this ballad was very popular in Scotland as well as in England. In fact, if anything, it has been said it was more popular in Scotland, which I think is also a very interesting comment on the ending, which is usual about trust between the countries. But it's another story, perhaps.
Thank you, Michael. We've got 2 more minutes. So can I ask a question? I had always assumed that Deloney wrote this, but you're implying that it was older. Are you older than Deloney?
I have nothing to really back that up, other than he was in the habit of taking old poems and popular ballads and playing with them and including them, and in this case, incorporating it into his novel.
Right. So
I have no evidence that that it was
Yeah.
significantly older. It just was something that was suggested that maybe we could look into further.
yeah, David's got something to say on this. You're muted, Dave. You're muted.
Yeah, well, that's why you didn't hear me say "oh bollocks" when I realised I was muted. Jack of Newbury includes Flood Field, the ballad, which on purely sort of date grounds one assumes was in existence before
That's true.
before Deloney. I mean, an educated guess, for which I have absolutely no evidence, is that the bare bones of the Fair Flower of Northumberland might well have been in existence, but it's quite possible that Deloney wrote around it, because his version has quite a lot of sort of anti-Scots sentiment, or you can read that into it, which is, tends not to be there in the versions collected from Scots singers, quite rightly. So I don't know. I mean, that's just a guess.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, there were other ballads in that book.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to have to move on. That was a really good start. Thank you,
Thank
Doug
you.
and Lynn, for that, and thanks for the discussion. That was really good. So we're now going to go to York and street cries and things with Rachel and Vivien. Over to you, Rachel. I think you're sharing your screen.
I am.
Yeah, we see that. That's good.
Excellent. I've lost sight of Vivien on my gallery. Oh, there she is. Great. Okay. Shall we begin?
Please do.
Thank you. So many thanks. We're really delighted to have an opportunity to share with you the early stages of Ballads of York, a research and performance project which has developed out of something much larger, the StreetLife project. StreetLife was a government-funded interdisciplinary regeneration project led by the University of York in partnership with the City of York Council, and focusing on York's historic high streets as heritage catalysts for community renewal. I'm particularly delighted, as StreetLife's lead, that Vivien Ellis has been able to join me, because Vivien's work with StreetLife over the last year has inspired much of what we're going to be presenting on today. StreetLife's aim has been to change how people think about York's Coney Street. It has nothing to do with rabbits. Coney Street, running from top left to bottom right on these maps, which date from 1300 and 1836, takes its name from the Old Norse, the King's Street or König Street, and indeed historically it has been the most prestigious street in York, with almost 2,000 years of history, during which the River Ouse brought travellers and goods into and out of the city, including paper and newsprint to feed the street's thriving printing presses via its rapidly industrialising river wharves. Here is a very smart and fashionable Coney Street in the late 18th century, as you look down towards Clifford's Tower from the Mansion House, which is pictured on the right there in St Helens Square. That's also the location of Betty's Tea Room, for those of us who like to navigate York by such things. Like many UK high streets, however, Coney Street has taken a steady downward turn over the last few decades, an exclusively retail thoroughfare undermined by a combination of internet and out-of-town shopping, punishing business rates, absentee investor landlords, and of course the pandemic. In 2021, with around 1 in 5 shopping units to let, Coney Street was a place nobody wanted to linger, with its back to the river and a palpable sense of decline in the air. Following a successful bid to the UK Community Renewal Fund, the StreetLife project was able to rent a former clothes shop, Dorothy Perkins, as you can see there, creating a public space right in the middle of Coney Street and gathering a team of researchers and creative artists through which to open up the street's musical past and printing, archaeological and architectural heritage, to rekindle public interest in and affection for Coney Street by making connections with the people who have lived, worked and played there down through the centuries. Coinciding as it has with plans for creating a riverside quarter in York, this has also encouraged a reimagining and reinvention of Coney Street affording developers the opportunity for deep public consultation, hopefully informing their design of a future York for residents and visitors. So musical events in the StreetLife Hub have included installations and exhibitions, as well as workshops by leading artists, open mic nights, and information sessions on aspects of the music industry. Self-guided multimedia trails have also been developed for Coney Street sites of musical interest and for York's historic music venues in collaboration with York Music Venue Network. And an activity that's brought together the musical, printing and architectural heritage of the street has been Vivien Ellis's Ballad Walks, inspired initially by a volume of York street cries published by James Kendrew of Colliergate in the early 19th century. I'm just going to hand over to Vivien at this point.
Thank you, Rachel. So I should explain at this point what are ballad walks. So the idea is that I lead people on a walk where I find songs, often with the broadside ballad and folk tradition, which link with places, themes and significant people, and I sing them on the walk, and people are invited to join in with the songs, which usually have a chorus. Lyrics are provided. I usually work with a person with local knowledge who speaks about the history of the places where we stop on the walk. I've worked with tour guides in Hull, Beverley and London, and for the StreetLife project, Louise Hampson, who's curator of the York Minster Library, and her students who've provided specific local knowledge. Where did the idea for ballad walks come from? Well, it all traces back to someone who's in our meeting today. That's Frankie Armstrong, who's been a guide and mentor for me and many other people in folk music and community music over the years. And the first singing walk I went on was with David Burbidge, who's a member of the Natural Voice Network, which is a national and now international network of singers who sing in a very inclusive way, inspired by Frankie's work. So David works up in Cumbria, and his was the first walk I went on. And also I was inspired by an academic called Dr. Una McElvenna, a cultural and literary historian who works on the early modern pan-European tradition of balladry and singing the news. And she's a specialist on the Western European history of crime and punishment, specifically public torture and execution, and publishing a book, Singing the News of Death, last year. So I was inspired by both David's singing walks as part of the National Natural Voice Network, and also Dr. Una McElvenna, who in 2016 invited me to sing on ballads as part of a walk entitled Off With Their Heads, for a Festival of Ideas, which was a partnership between the University of Kent and Canterbury Cathedral. She was at that point a reader in history at the University of Kent. The idea was to engage new audiences with heritage as part of the cathedral's project to collaborate with the city. So she devised a walk around Canterbury with ballads sung by me, inviting the public to join as condemned prisoners began their route through Canterbury to execution in Renaissance times. The environment, the procession was full of song, and the event recreated their journey. I was very excited by the concept of engaging with people, places and ballads in a new way. And at the time I wrote to Dr. McElvenna and I said, I love the idea of doing these songs in an interesting community, public and historical setting where their nature as a shared cultural practice is to the fore, rather than as performance pieces by trained experts to a largely passive audience in a concert hall. My only previous experience of singing broadside ballads up to that point had been as concert pieces with the Do-Fi Collective and with Jeremy Barlow's The Broadside Band. So this is what inspired me, a combination of the kind of inclusivity of David Burbidge's singing walk idea and Dr. McElvenna's event. And so since then, the following year, 2017, I created a ballad walk in Hull, which was then City of Culture, as part of the historically informed summer school, a music summer school exploring the links between early music and folk music. I wanted to get out and about with my students, exploring music that linked places with people and to collaborate with a local historian. I'm probably over my 2-minute limit that I can speak here now, but just to cut a long story short, I've led many ballad walks since then in the City of London with a blue badge tourist guide called David Wynne Phipps. I've created a ballad walk for a festival called Baroque at the Edge, and I continue to lead these walks, particularly with my the charity I work with, which is called the Mental Fight Club, which is a London charity for mental health, and I lead regular walks with patrons of the charity. So that's what a ballad walk is. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel now.
Thanks, Vivien. So Kendrew's The Cries of York, as the title page states, was one of many chapbooks he produced for the entertainment of children, of good children. Appropriately sized for that readership, as you can see on the right, it was also handsomely illustrated with woodcuts, some of which locate particular street vendors at specific and recognisable sites within York. Kendrew himself operated from number 23 Colliergate, a street in close proximity to the city's main marketplaces and running parallel with the butcher shops in the shambles, as you can see here. So it's not fanciful to imagine that the cries described and preserved in the book were part of his personal day-to-day sound world. As with any other city, the retail world of early 19th century York was very different from today's. Crowds of street vendors, for example, selling sand from Acombe or cranberries from Lincolnshire, would enter the city of York each morning, touting their wares in the streets and cultivating a distinctive but familiar cry to attract customers. The needle seller pictured here on the right, incidentally, also plays on the Jew's or Jaw's harp. You can just see that in his left hand. And as with the tinker and needle seller here, several of Kendrew's 27 vendors are positioned at the gates and posterns of the old York city walls. While the toy lamb seller, orange seller, and city bellman, the forerunner of the recently reinstated York Town crier, are all shown at or near established markets. This would have emphasised their legitimacy. Street traders, also known as hawkers and peddlers, of course, needed a licence to trade to avoid being accused of vagrancy or of trying to avoid paying city taxes. These woodcuts also depict known examples of York's market architecture, which has long since been dismantled. Presumably to avoid taking the limelight from butchers in the shambles, the only meat being sold by Kendrew's traders was foraged or snared in the wild. So we have larks and rabbits for sale, as well as cockles and oysters, reminding us that the Ouse was tidal, indeed famous for its boar, which was said at times to have roared like a dragon. The sale of printed goods is also depicted. We have calendars of prisoners, their crimes and execution dates, York, of course, being a site of execution, the Tyburn of the North, and lists of runners for the horse racing at the Knavesmire, or Knavesmire as it was then, although interestingly, Kendrew does not include a ballad seller. Also here on the right is a sailor selling toy windmills to children, and a chimney sweep touts for business in his stentor's voice. None of the texts and woodcuts are signed, with just one exception. The oyster seller gathering oysters on the river mud at one of the staithes before Ouse Bridge. This is signed by Carroll, as you can see at the bottom right-hand edge of the woodcut, and a note in the hand of one of Kendrew's descendants writing in the printer's sample book at the British Library, more of that in a minute, confirms that Mr. Carroll was responsible for many of the images in this 32-page volume. This image is worth dwelling on for a further moment because it allows us to date Kendrew's Cries of York to within a few years. Depicted here is the old Ouse Bridge, familiar from Farrington's oil painting, now hanging at Merchant Adventurers Hall, shown here. And this bridge was dismantled between 1810 and 1818. In addition to this, the inclusion of a woodcut of the comet seen in 1811 on the inside back cover further corroborates that this volume dates from the early 1810s. Also intriguing is the geographically inaccurate addition of the Minster's towers, just visible above the bridge parapet. Whether this was done as a further sonic signifier or to give the volume some added York flavour is not clear, and was probably a combination of the two. Despite the rich visual illustrations of Kendrew's Cries of York, which also provides us with a descriptive text in the first or third person, as well as usually a quotation from the cry itself, no information whatsoever is provided regarding the tunes. So Vivien, how did we, or you, go about finding a tune to match the words of the cry and bring it to life?
Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So in general, I looked everywhere. I started off looking at a website which Rachel signposted me to called London Sound Survey, where in fact the street cries, the York Street Cry, facsimile of the York Street Cries there. And this fantastic website was created by Ian Rawes as a personal project when he worked at the National Sound Archive. And he used the name of the Sound Archive in combination with a book by John Stowes from 1598 called A Survey of London to create this website, the London Sound Survey. And he spent a few years recording sounds of London and collecting all the historical sources for the sounds of London that he could find, including street cries. It's a really good place to start. So here, for instance, for the song Young Lambs to Sell, he referenced the Illustrated Book of Nursery Rhymes and Songs edited by Thomas Ledgerwood Hateley, published in 1865. And this contained the melody, thank you, there it is, the melody for a melody for Young Lambs to Sell. These young lambs, by the way, are not actual live lambs, they're toys made usually from pottery or from little sticks covered in cotton wool with matchsticks for legs, and they were sold to children for a penny. And it seems that as far as we can tell from Hateley, it looks like he's taken existing melodies for street cries he knew and arranged them for the parlour or the nursery, the idea being that the child and the nurse could sing these songs together. So it places them in a particular class of people, the market for this kind of book. He suggests that the tune for Old Chairs to Mend and Young Lambs to Sell is interchangeable. So it goes something like, if I had as much money as I could tell, I never would cry young lambs to sell, young lambs to sell, young lambs to sell. I never would cry young lambs to sell. But of course, since I didn't have long to find tunes for all of the 27 cries in the book, and I didn't find tunes for all of them, didn't have very long, so I did as best I could to find tunes. But then of course, since then, I found a fantastic tune in the library of Ralph Vaughan Williams' library. For instance, one noted down in 1819 by Juliet Williams from a Mrs. Welding in Speke, Liverpool, who remembered an old man singing a variant of this song in the streets in 1890. And there were several variations, and I'm sure that we could all find more if we put our minds to it. Yes, so I just looked at the British Library Sound Archive, the Ralph Vaughan Williams Library. I looked at the this street survey to find various tunes that I thought could work with the lyrics in the York Street Cries. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. So as a way of preserving the work done on this part of the project, we filmed Vivien singing the cries in sites around York using a 360-degree camera. And from this, a virtual reality experience was created. which the opening screen you can see in front of you. And this was a means of experimenting further with relocating Kendrew's cries back into the streets of York and to the specific locations as far as we could as they look today. And this really is making the most of immersive multimedia technology to bring them to life. In the slides at the end of this presentation, we've included several links, including to this VR experience, in a form that you can view on a PC or Mac if you don't have the virtual reality headset to hand. As we've seen, The Cries of York is found among Kendrew's chapbooks and nursery rhyme collections, and it was later joined by a volume of Cries of London. But Kendrew was also, as many here will know, a publisher of ballads. While the chapbooks have attracted the interest of contemporary historians of children's literature, however, the ballads have tended to be overlooked or set aside as ephemera. The next stage, or the current stage rather, of the Ballads of York project, therefore, is or involves a exploration of what survives of this material. Kendrew lived, worked, and was buried in York, and the local archives have served as well in preserving his songs. Here are just a few examples gleaned from York Explore, for example. On the left is The Alteration of Times, a scathing commentary on the behaviour, morals, fashions, etc. of the upper classes today, and harking back to Elizabethan times. This is a known ballad, but the reference to the restoration of the king in the final line suggests that it was an old one when Kendrew printed it in the early 1800s. On the right is The Orphan Boy, again a known ballad, and telling the story of a boy whose joy at Nelson's triumph at the Battle of Trafalgar turns to misery when his mother dies of grief, with the news that his father has been killed in action. In the middle, however, is a ballad which appears to be unknown and that has specific connections to York. It was produced to celebrate the victory of the bay mare, Rosette, at the Ebor races in York. According to the General Stud Book, Rosette was bred and owned by a Henry Pierce at his stud in Bedale, which confirms what the ballad sheet says at the top of the page there. Bedale, of course, fairly near York, and the bay mare herself was born in 1803 and then run by Pierce for 6 years, allowing us to date this song confidently to between 1804 to 10. There's even an oil painting of the bay mare Rosette and her jockey, looking very fine, which I'm trying to locate at present. It's not very easy to find when you're searching Google for racehorse and Rosette. It's not a very productive search. But it's also interesting, this ballad is also interesting in the way that it outlines the pedigree of the horse in verses 6 and 7. So Tuberose and Rosamond and Beninborough are all horses that were behind her in the bloodline that Pierce was developing. So this gives us a ballad with specific York connections to real events, real people, and real animals. So with regard to Kendrew's output, however, we are in an exceptionally fortunate position. In the British Library, a sample book produced by Kendrew's descendants has been preserved, containing 923 items, mostly songs, of which around 300 were printed by Kendrew himself in the period around 1803 to the early 1830s. The book was first discussed by Roger Davis in his 1988 study of Kendrew's chapbooks for children, and it purports to contain one of each song published by Kendrew from which it could be reprinted if any of them sold out. The ballad Rosette is not listed here, but since Kendrew only began his printing operations in around 1803, which would make this an early publication, he'd perhaps not begun the sample book at this point, or perhaps it had simply sold out completely. What is remarkable in the context of ballad scholarship, it seems to me, is the high value placed on this ephemeral material, not only by Kendrew himself to take the trouble to preserve it in this way, his stock in this way, but also by later members of his family, also in the printing trade. This letter from Kendrew's grandson, James Hattersley Carr, was added to the sample book to explain the nature of the collection. And I've highlighted a couple of significant passages in blue. And I have to say, the British Library have done an amazing job conserving this volume into something that really does protect and conserve the materials, the flaky printing of the ballads themselves for future generations in very good shape. So just looking, I'm not sure you need me to read those passages, but you can see the point of the sample book, but also some of the information there, which is so valuable about where some of these songs went after the death of Hattersley Carr's grandfather, and also who bought the press after Kendrew himself had died. So Kendrew is also, in addition to ballads printed by Kendrew himself, there are also ballads printed by others and sold from his shop. Printers including publishers from Hull, Derby, Leeds, etc. So this gives us a really clear sense of a network of printers operating within a few streets of each other in York, but also across Yorkshire and the North East, and probably down towards the Midlands. So onto this slide. Kendrew is also well represented among an astonishing collection of ballads preserved at York Minster Library, the bulk of which are part of a local antiquarian collection gathered by Edward Hailstone, who was a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries and lived in Bradford, Yorkshire, in the mid to late Victorian period. These were catalogued alongside other ballads found among the additional manuscripts at York Minster Library in around 2000 by a volunteer, and the result of his or her work was a catalogue of 2,095 items, all in the category of broadsides. Part of our work is to check these to make sure that they really are broadsides and break them down into their respective compartments within that heading. But it promises to be a huge and rich collection, giving unprecedented opportunities to study and understand a local ballad repertoire, often containing specific references to York, and then of course the relationship of this repertoire to the national ballad literature. So just to outline where we're going with this, and we welcome any thoughts, feedback, suggestions, pointers, etc. On these ideas. What we plan to do, and we've applied for some internal funding from the university to help us along the way with this, is first of all to check the York Minster Library and Kendrew collections, the ballads within them, for those that are unique, for variants that are unique, and those that just duplicate ballads in the form that they are surviving in other collections. Working with that, we'll be gathering that data together, and we would be able to use that to supplement the existing catalogues and digital libraries with new data. We also want to be able to map the printers' networks, particularly those that are reflected in the Kendrew sample book, who he was in touch with, who he was swapping material with, and what his business relationships were with other printers of ballads across the region and within the city. We obviously want to explore local references here, the politics, the figures, the society, the events, the kind of tensions that often get commented on within these ballads. And we want to make public engagement possible, as we've been doing with the StreetLife project through up to this point, through digitization, through performance, and through workshops such as those we've had from Vivien in the last few months. We ultimately want to make a contribution to a broader project, which would be about reconstructing a ballad repertoire specific to York, Yorkshire, the North East, which hopefully then will help us to see more about how local ballad repertoires mix together, mingle, and the balance and the dissemination of ballads from particular regions to something more national through the period we are interested in. So just to close here, we've got some links for you to the filmed workshop and ballad walk that Vivien did for us in Coney Street, the VR experience, the StreetLife website, and we just wanted to highlight that on the 8th of March, Vivien will be coming to do another ballad walk for us, drawing on some more of the ballad repertoire at York Minster Library, with luck. And that's on the 8th of March. It's not yet advertised, but it will be among the events detailed on that website very shortly. For those who happen to be in York, do come and visit us at 29 to 31 Coney Street. We're there until the end of July. Come and see what's going on, look at the exhibitions and interpretation materials. It'd be lovely to meet you there. And Vivien is also giving a performance, late night opening at the Museum of London in an evening on the 24th of March, which is called City of Gallows, and she'll be singing execution ballads. during that time. So that's another event for your diary. And we have plenty of people also to thank. You can see who they are there, and you particularly for listening, and to Steve for the invitation to share some of these ideas with you at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel and Vivien. You need to unshare your screen, Rachel.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Thank you very much. That's great. Thank you. And it sort of tied in with the first talk as well, didn't it? As if we planned it all. We don't have any time really for questions. If anybody's got a very quick question, we could do it, but it would have to be quick. Although I've got a comment, as always, with street cries. I'm always a bit worried about street cries because in the 17th and 18th century, there, as you know, there were lots of publications by musicians and choir masters and so on, and also by broadside and chapbook printers of street cries from London, from Paris, from New York, from Liverpool, from all over the place. And without looking at them in detail, my impression is that they've all copied from each other. But you're implying, or you're saying, in fact, that Kendrew was actually reporting what was going on in the York streets. So in effect, he was collecting the street cries rather than just recycling what somebody wrote, in effect, 200 years before. And is that right, that you think he was literally collecting from the criers themselves?
That's my belief. I don't know, Vivien, if you have thoughts on this.
I think he was, but that's not to say I've done an in-depth kind of investigation. But I think that he was. I think that these were local callers known to everybody in York, because if they were sold to a York audience, everybody in York would be familiar with them. You know, they would be very strange to not quote the characters that everybody was familiar with in York.
Right. Okay. Yes. You're right. I just quickly looked at London Street Cries by Tuer, which is a collection. So that's London, and he's used exactly the same words for the young lambs to sell as the ones that you quoted. But of course, Tuer is after Kendrew, so he may well have nicked it from Kendrew rather than Kendrew nicking it from somebody else. But again, I think before you can claim that, I think we need to do a bit more research, literally just comparing the text. It's quite possible that in York they were singing exactly the same words as they were in London, you know, like they were for folk songs. But I just suggest a little bit more digging outside of York to get a broader context.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, the descriptions under the woodcuts are kind of separate from what you generally identify as the cry, which seems to be the thing that runs up along the top. So it's often just a very short motif rather than anything more fully developed. But yeah, I agree with you completely. The cries of London, I think, are much more generic, and it's less personal to him. He's kind of, I think, going for a, you know, what will be popular, and also giving himself the cachet of selling something that's London focused as well as something that's local to his city. But yeah, I mean, certainly there's much more comparison work to be done between sources on this.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for the presentation. We're going to move on to our third and last presentation today. And I can't see Fay on the screen, but I'm sure she's still here. Hello, Fay.
Hello.
Hello. Over to you. We can see that. That's good.
Smashing. Hello. Amazing talks. Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm quite liking the thread of traditional songs and then contemporary performance of them, which is cool. So this project, I'm talking more at the beginning of a project rather than the two previous ones, which are talking about what they've done and what they've been doing. So this, I'm introducing the Access Folk project. We've been going a year, actually, so it's a late introduction, but I want people to know what's going on with it and have the opportunity to ask questions and get involved, really. So this isn't so much my findings as our scope, our aims and our methods, as a creative title suggests. So Access Folk is a UKRI FLF project. So that's fancy academic speech for a well-funded academic project. It's a 5-year-long project for me and some research associates and some money to spend on doing things as well. So it's one of the kind of good as it gets pots. So I feel really lucky that we've got this within this area, actually. So that's what it is. And what we're trying to do is look at contemporary folk singing in England. I'll leave that there. We'll keep coming around to that. So, but this is basically what it is. It's an academic project looking at folk singing. For any kind of project, you have to have a scope. I do this in quite a few talks, the whole can of worms. What is folk? You call something folk and then people start saying, well, what do you mean? And then in a project where you're kind of wanting folk to be defined by what people do and what people want it to be, because it's about increasing and diversifying access to folk singing. So if we say folk singing is this and then people want it to be something else, then we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot, if you see what I mean. We're defining what other people think it is before we've worked out what other people think it is. So defining a scope has been really difficult, and as it would be for anything anyway. So our scope is what's on the screen here. I'll read it out because I know that's helpful for some people. Live singing events that are open to the public and involve communal engagement, but which are not primarily part of an act of worship. Repertoire incorporates A, material reflective of the historical and contemporary experience of communities within England, including the local and or familial heritage of the singers, and B, considered part of a tradition of singing. There may be an emphasis on activities that incorporate self-awareness on behalf of the organisers or participants as being or desiring to be part of the folk scene in England. So that's not trying to define folk song, that's defining what we have capacity to look at in this project. Okay, so don't all come and attack me. So yeah, essentially we're looking at live things that are communal, not explicitly religious. That was a tricky one, because so much folk material includes reference to religion, but it's not explicitly religious. And then of course looking at this idea about whose history or heritage are we reflecting? What is England? What is English? Very difficult words. And this idea of being considered as part of a tradition, and is it only people that recognise their own practice as folk that we include, or are we allowed to tell somebody that what they're doing is folk music? Anyway, massively complicated, but that's what we're kind of working at. We did describe some of the terms. If anybody's interested, this is all on the website, so you can look and nitpick and contribute, please. Yes, that's the thing. It's not just criticize it, but tell us where things are wrong. I should say that at the beginning. I really want this, the whole project to have input from people. So don't be shy to point out the bits that grate on you, because I'd much rather know while we're going along rather than at the end. So please have a look at those. In terms of the people we're trying to work with, because most research in folk singing, and well, folk song is a bit different because it's the materials, but the folk singing is working with folk singers or within the folk scene and observing what's happening. Whereas if we're trying to increase and diversify participation, we really need to understand what's happening to the people who don't do folk singing and why they're not getting involved, what their thoughts and feelings are. So we need to have a scope on who we're trying to engage as well. So this slide has this is from sort of music management theory, and it splits audiences up into different kinds of people. Your core participants, the people who are regular folk singers, organisers, people who do it all the time. Your casual participants who are occasional, they might turn up now and then, they might be friends or family of folk singers, so they're familiar with the scene but not the core participants. Then you have potential participants who are people who are interested in similar things. So might be interested in heritage, or they might sing in different contexts. So that it wouldn't be ridiculous to think that they could have an interest in folk singing. And then at the end there, we have hard to reach participants, who are people who don't like any form of folk music, don't like, you know, they're not particularly interested in heritage studies, they don't like singing. So we're not trying to turn the whole of the country into folk singers, because that would be ridiculous and unethical. Why should everybody want to be folk singers? But what we want to do is help those potential participants try and understand what it is that's stopping them getting involved when they're showing a tendency to maybe want to be involved, and that we've seen for other people there's a lot of benefits to getting involved. So that's who we're working with. That's the kinds of contexts we're working with, and these are the kinds of people we're working with. So from folk song singing studies so far, partly through my PhD and lots of other people's work as well, in a nutshell, we know that the repertoire, connecting with history, looking at our local communities, England through time, different kinds of people, stories, and getting together and singing together in pubs over a long time, that creates a sense of community, a sense of national community, a sense of local community, camaraderie, friendship. The act of singing folk songs together creates community. It's brilliant. We also know that the repertoire is sometimes contended, sometimes the themes in them or the language can be distasteful to contemporary thinking. And some people can disagree with certain songs from the past. And some people find when they walk into a folk session with a load of people having a brilliant time who know exactly what they're doing, and they don't know what they're doing, and they get shushed, or, you know, they do something wrong, they didn't know how to behave. They can find that incredibly off-putting and cliquey and feel incredibly excluded. So it's a really strange setting where I found it fascinating. This was my PhD thesis, really, was that in a scene that purports to be open and welcoming and inclusive, and that's the whole rhetoric, the actual practice is incredibly complex and complicated, and there's no guidance on how to do it. So it's pretending to be open, but it feels very exclusive. Or it's not pretending, it's trying to be open, but struggling to understand why it's exclusive. So we know that. What we don't know is that how the people who aren't involved in folk singing view the practice, or how they might want to engage, what alterations or adaptations might need to be made to the existing practice in order to help or facilitate those people to get involved, and how to integrate people without reducing the benefits for the existing members. Because that's just it, that the sense of clique, the sense of connection is what gives people on the inside the real depth of experience. And yet that's equally the thing that stops other people feeling connected. So how can we navigate all those? That's basically what this project is trying to look at. And how are we doing it? We're doing it through a method well, there are loads of different terms for this kind of approach to research. As you can see on this slide, there's, I don't know how many little bubbles there are on the outside there, but terms such as cooperative inquiry, action heritage, collaborative ethnography, co-creation, co-research, they're really sexy terms. And the basic premise of it, the one umbrella term is kind of coming out of all this, which is participatory research. And we're basically using that term to cover lots of these other terms as well. So it could be, yeah, they've got a lot of similarity. And the thrust of it is about trying to create a more equal relationship between the researched and the researcher. So instead of me just getting all this lovely money and deciding what to do for the folk scene, it's about getting the people who will be affected by this, so the existing folk singers and the potential folk singers, and getting them to design the questions, for them to think what should we be finding out, how should we be finding out, and really contributing to the creation of the method, the creation of the questions, not just having things done to them. So that's a kind of an approach to the research. A second kind of approach is action research. So this is, again, it's very involved and embedded in doing stuff with people rather than just this kind of theoretical, I don't know, even the term academic, an academic inquiry is something of theoretical value, not practical value, you know, in some dictionary definitions. And that's something we're really trying to get away from here. This is an academic project, but we want it to have practical value. So action research is where you come up with some kind of problem, and you're actively encouraging change through an intervention. So sometimes ethnomusicology has toyed with this, the impact of the researcher in the field, shadows in the field, you know, that you shouldn't just go into a community, create change, like what are the waves, what are the ethical issues involved with that. So this, instead of sort of pretending that's not going to happen, is taking that right at the beginning and say, right, we're going to make some change. But we're trying to bring everybody who will be affected by that change with us and keep them coming along with it. So you come up with an issue, you come up with some vague theory about how you might solve that issue, you try it out, you see what worked, what didn't work, you come up with some more ways that you might perfect it, you try it out, so you're learning through doing, not just trying to dream up an answer and having no idea whether this theoretical solution will solve anything. So yes, so action research is a big part of it as well. This slide is basically the structure of the project and how we're trying to bring those things in. So in the middle, the darker blob is University of Sheffield academics. So that's me and Esbjørn Buttermark and Kirsty Kay at the moment. And there will be other research associates coming in and out as the years go on, but they're the current team. And Helen Grindley, who's our project manager, who's amazing, keeps us all together. So we are the academics, and above us is the national board, and that's 13 people from, we've got, well, people from English Folk Dance and Song Society, from English Folk Expo, so they're sort of national folk organisations. We've got representatives from Black Lives in Music or Drake Music, who are national organisations in specialist areas. We've got folk club organisers, we've got audience members, we've got students, young students, we've got, you know, we're trying to basically get a whole range of different people who've got an interest in this, and they make the actual decisions. So they sign off on the budgets and they sign off on things and act as our consultants. So they have the ultimate power, but also we want to connect with people on the ground as well. So where we are now is 1 year into this 5-year project. And this first year, we've been trying to get all the information, do all that collaborative participatory research stuff with folk singers and non-folk singers, so that we can decide, right, these are the main issues, and then we go on to do some action research in the next phase. So the 3 pieces of work that we've just done are, maybe I'll just zip to this one. No, I'll just go back. Sorry, we've done on the, I don't know, my right, your left, the long side of the screen, we've done consulting groups, and that was to see what issues existing folk singers are experiencing with minority issues. I don't know, the language, this is a difficult area for me, is like I've suddenly had to become an expert in language in all the different sensitive areas, and I'm not very good at it, so apologies when I say things wrong. But what we wanted to do was get people together who have lived or professional or specific interests in areas of protected characteristics. So we created these 6 groups: age, disability, sexuality and gender, race and ethnicity, beliefs, politics and religion, and class and socio-economic status. The last one isn't an official protected characteristic, but the Arts Council and various other bodies are recognising it as a substantial issue that people face when they're trying to access the arts and other aspects of society. So we had these people came together and shared their experiences, positive and negative, about folk singing under the umbrella of that specific lens, what the difficulties were. So yes, so that has just gone to press, a report from those people. So that highlights the issues currently faced by people within the folk scene. The Ask a Friend project on the other side of the screen, that was a sort of experimental interviewing method that we did, where we asked folk singers to find a friend who doesn't participate in folk singing, and talk to them about why not, and what their thoughts on folk singing are, what they already know about it, what their past experience of it has been, or their presumptions of it has been. And that's been really fascinating. So we've reached people that we wouldn't have been able to find as academics, and they talked to their friends in ways that they just wouldn't have been able to talk to me as a person going to interview them strangely. So that's been a really interesting method. We're just in the process of analysing that now. And we're currently just putting the finishing touches to a survey as well that will go to folk singers and organisers more broadly. So people that aren't necessarily affected by protected characteristics issues, but just to find out their experiences, their desires for change. And yes, well, so those questions are in the pipeline at the moment. And when we have all that knowledge about where things are, we will move on to the hub sections there. And that's where we'll be asking people to basically bid to run projects, do things, play at interventions. So that could be existing folk clubs that want to do something a bit differently. It could be new organisers. It could be a cafe that wants to put folk in. So people who've never done folk before, but want to start experimenting. So that's going to be the next phase of the project. So yeah, these are the things we've done so far. A report about participatory research in music, where we worked with quite a few different music organisations to look at how to do the method. It's all been very meta, a method on how to do method. And then the consulting group report, yes, that's coming out now. The Accessing Folk Singing in England should be finished this weekend. The Ask a Friend, oh, and artistic research as well. I've been reflecting on my own practice as a singer as well, because Englishness has been a real massive part of it, and it's a very sensitive and difficult subject to talk about. So I thought a healthy way or an ethical way might be to just look very deeply at my practice. So that's what I've been doing. Coming up next is the survey. As I've said, we're going to do a big scoping exercise of existing activities and things that are happening. So we're not just trying to reinvent the wheel. Then we'll do the action research, interventions, and I'll be doing some more artistic research. Issues we've faced are, this is quite common with participatory research, so it's not a big shock, but actually the top one was a bit more of a shock for me. So an issue was putting the worlds together, academia and the community, you know, and all the academic stuff. They say, oh, it's very difficult. You have to work out how to talk to the community. And I'm like, well, I know how to talk to folkies. I'm a folkie, that's fine. But actually, I spent so long in academia that, like, putting the website together or the instructions for how to do Ask a Friend, it just falls into, you know, you just assume everybody knows what a Google Doc is and it's fine. And, you know, and it's so easy to forget how to talk to different kinds of people. So I was very confident in that area, and it still was really, really complicated and difficult. And part of that as well is confidence from participants. You know, the folkies I've met, they've generally all been very keen to contribute to surveys and give opinions, and that's been brilliant. But when they were asked to be more of a researcher hat on and volunteer as interviewers, or come to consulting groups and actually take ownership of the project, there's been a lot more hesitance, and people seem a lot less confident that they are who we want. And we do. We want people for the knowledge that they have. We're not asking people to pretend to be academics. We still want them to just do what they do, but confidence has been low. And time, everything takes so long. And I'm always a little bit overambitious about what can be achieved. So I have all these big crazy ideas, and then Eshbjorn, well, Helen, that's where the amazing project manager comes in. She just sort of sits on my shoulder and says, Faye, no. So yes, I'm trying to narrow things down a bit. So those are some of the issues. The benefits of this approach have been that we've had a lot more nuanced questions. So certainly in terms of looking from different protected characteristics, from the perspective of people who have different protected characteristic minorities, there are things there that it would never have crossed my mind, because, you know, I've got my own demographic, I know my experience, I can be as empathetic or as wild and inclusive as I want to be, but if I have no conception of what an experience is like for somebody else, I can't get that without asking them. So the questions and the knowledge that's there is, I couldn't have done it without this method. So that's really been interesting. It gives me confidence that it's not just me saying, yes, this is what it is, because everybody's reading it, everybody's commenting. This is what we think. It's not just me. It's been a great way to sort of share news and get into networks and reach people. And it's been really nice with people feeling appreciated and connected to the project. I know some folk music projects, people can feel a bit observed or sort of taken advantage of, that an academic has come and written about their music without them hearing it. And so I've heard some negative experiences of folk musicians and academics. So it's really nice to feel that people are on side, which is great. So that's what we're doing. Next week, Friday and Saturday, we're having a 2-day symposium in Sheffield. Online events are amazing, but we really wanted to get people together. What we have got one online session, but so you can sign up for that, or if you can get to Sheffield, you'll be very welcome. With the same participatory research ethos, it's a mixture of academics and students and practitioners and organisers. Everybody that has some expertise in folk singing is coming and presenting what they know, and we're all going to discuss together, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. And we're going to have a good sing in the pub on Friday night as well. So that's my final pitch. But yeah, critique, question, ideas, either now or drop me emails. Totally welcome, totally up for debate on any and all of this. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Fay. And you've ended it on exactly on time. That's very impressive. I'm very pleased with you. We've got time for a couple of very quick questions if anybody wants to raise a hand. But I'd like to point out one fatal flaw in your methodology. You're assuming that folk singers have friends. And I'm not so sure about this.
We did also say acquaintances, colleagues, family members, you know, yeah.
Right. Ask a friend if you can find one. John.
We've all got a postman, you know, it's fine.
John Baxter.
Yeah, I just want to say hi, Fay, and I think this is really important, and I think perhaps we need to think about whether the way that we present our work might be producing barriers to people singing the material that we're talking about. You know, sometimes it can feel like you have to be really clever to be able to sing folk song, because you need to know all the history of the song. And that's just a concern I have, and something I think we're thinking about. And I can't remember what the project was called, but there was a brilliant participatory research project in Ireland in the 1930s when they set school children to collect the songs of their families. And I wondered if it might be interesting to look at that as participatory research that's been done in the past, and how did that succeed and or not. But anyway, that's my 2 points.
That sounds brilliant. Yeah, so most of my work in the past, so all my work, my whole life I've dedicated to increasing access to the folk scene. But most of my work has been about how to help other people come in, and helping people, familiarize them with what folk singing is so that they can get involved. But this is, I'm starting to realize that maybe some of the way we do things has to change as well. So it becomes a bit more of a meeting in the middle. And that's a hard one. That's a really hard one, because you don't want to reduce the benefits for the people that are loving doing it, how they're doing it. So it's tricky, but yeah, you're absolutely right. And we don't notice, you know, when one of the biggest sort of anecdotes I get is from young people who say, oh God, and when I've sung that song, 10 people come and tell me I did it wrong, or there's this version, or did I know that, or that I didn't know this bit and I sang the wrong tune, or da, da, da. And the people who are saying it through pure love, and because they love the music, they want to enthuse that singer, but it's not received in the way that it's given often. And so it massively puts people off. So yes, I think there does have to be a bit of reflection about what we do and the impacts of what we do. It's not that people are bad, it's just we don't know how other people are taking it sometimes. So yeah, I'm hoping some of that can get shared. Thanks.
Thank you, Fay. Conrad, a very quick question, Conrad. You're still muted. Still muted, Conrad. You're muted, Conrad.
Sorry, did that. Anyway, so anyway, I found that there are two
parts to the equation. You need to have relevance, which means the music has to mean something to these people, and you have to have accessibility. You have to be able to find that you're not locked out by feelings of professionalism or other social means. When you look at relevance, a person has to look at a folk song and see something. They can't have a blank space in their head. They have to say, that's something important, relevance, and then they have to be able to afford the drinks. If you go into some of these places where live music is seen, the drinks are so damn expensive, you can't afford them. Why do folk musicians not know that people need humble places where they can just sit and have a nice warm time and drink as much as they want for their pocketbook? It's robbery. They are just cutting themselves off. And the other problem is that people don't understand what music is about. It's supposed to be for the people in official folklore. You're training these young people up to be concert musicians, get a job. It's a career. Now, if you have all the folk musicians ever came up, if they were going for a career, they would never do it. There's not that many careers. But when people are going to helping agencies like the folklore societies, they are told that they want to be a professional, get a recording deal, get a place on the stage. That came with the communist revolution of the second revival. But anyway, they got the means of production. It's not about means of production.
Right, thank you, Conrad. Fay,
Yeah.
did you want to say something quickly about the cost of drinks at folk club?
One thing I will say is I think there's a really interesting gap that I'm starting to spot between folk music, folk singing, and folklore, and that there's a huge enthusiasm from a lot of people that don't do folk singing about cultural heritage, folklore, but they're put off about something about folk singing, and it could be related to that, like you're saying, Conrad, there, that it's turned into a sort of professionalism rather than a calendar custom type thing. It's moved. So yeah, there's definitely something to look into that. Thank you.
Fine. I think we should wrap it up there because I need to go to the loo. And I think we've had a very good afternoon session. So thank you very much to our 5 presenters. Can we give them a round of applause, please? Thank you. As I said, we'll see you in a month's time, 12th of March. Don't forget to go to Fay's website and participate in the project. Okay, that's an order. All right, everybody, thanks for coming.
All right.
I'll see you all again in a month's time.